Now, I am so pleased to be able to be in a position to introduce you to this next troublemaker. One of the people I really admire when the intervention happened, Barbara Shaw, was right out the gate, and she stayed out the gate as one of the great spokespeople and warriors around this issue. Barbara's Arrente, Kaytetye, Warlpiri and Waramungu from Alice Springs. She's the first female deputy chair for the Central Land Council for the new CEO. She's involved in the working group for the Uluru Statement. She was an engagement officer for the Royal Commission into the protection and detention of children in the Northern Territory. She's a cultural carer within her own family and, of course, a founding member and current member of the Intervention Rollback Action Group, or IRAG. So, Barb, it's great to see you and to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. And I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners and all custodians of this land, both past, present and future, and as well as acknowledging young emerging leaders such as my niece, Amelia Cunop. There's something I want to do before I get started. Hello to my little friends, Jalamba and Iskra. I do that because they're also watching me, I hope.
Yes, I saw Paddy Gibson down there somewhere.
Yep, he's there, him and that. I don't know what I can say. I've, like you said, been there for the last 13 years. Watched John Howard and Mel Brupp announce it on ABC. And I've been fighting ever since because I knew that I was doing the right thing by my family, my children, my elders, and standing up for what was right. I'd have to say for Auntie Pat, you know, that she's right in saying support for family and children to be out on country. Uncle Harry's been a vocal elder leader in Yundamu since day one also. And our honourable member for Nhulunbuy, he says it all and he's spot on. Even though he's from Yolngu Nation in the top end and I come from the centre, there's nothing's changed between us. As a, I guess now, and for also what Amelia was saying is that there might have been minor changes to our lives, but worst of all, it's changed for the worse. You know, we just had, you know, Greg Marks talk and Stephen Gray talk about statistics and what had happened. And then all of these reports coming in, going into both territory government, federal government. But then these reports and commissions, reviews, they've all just probably swept past the eyes of all these parliamentarians over the years, over the last 13 years. Like Uncle Harry said, you know, we've had 5 prime ministers, 4 to 5 prime ministers, no one's taken any notice. Over the years, over the last 13 years, you know, from 2007, I was a very angry and emotional person around the policies and how it was affecting our mob. Not only us in the northern, in our major town centres, Alice Springs, Tennant Creek, Catherine, Darwin, and, you know, up at Nhulunbuy, because they're the major town centres that services our communities or our homelands, but they also, our mob travel in and out of these town centres and or service centres. So I you know, when it first came out, all I thought was of my grandfather, you know, was my initial thought, is how is he going to understand the legislation? And then knowing that he's caretaker and living out on my homeland that I got handed back in 1988, straight after the Barunga statement was handed to Bob Hawke. People like, you know, Rosie Cunott Monks that Amelia now represents and stands up for her grandmother. Uncle Harry's been standing up since the Central Land Council started, you know, and of course you got Mark for the Yulunga mob, and then you have my mob. You know, I began to realise that if we're going to keep protesting, you know, you're going to have that other element in our society saying, you know, we don't need protesters, or, you know, you've got an opponent that's going to feed false lies to the rest of Australia saying, you know, there's no police brutality, there's no child abuse happening in our communities. Well, for a fact, we know that it's happening. We know that, you know, being part of the Royal Commission, you know, and looking at children being abused in the detention centres or in and out of home care. And, you know, so along with Granny, I've got to say hello to you too, Granny. Haven't seen you for a while. You know, we've been very diplomatic, you know, so I'm in a position now, you know, with the Central Land Council and also still with Tangentyere Council, and just speaking up on issues that affect our mob and how governments and agencies can help our mob. And I am a big, strong believer in constitutional change and supporting treaty, because if we were added into the Constitution and we had our rights to our culture, our language, our land, the intervention wouldn't have been in place. And it would have had to be in a block. But I believe there are people out there that are willing and caring, compassionate people that are able to help and stand up for people like myself or people like our elders out in remote communities or on homelands. You know, I don't have to go into details, but I know even to this day, you know, we're still talking about how there's no jobs for people out there. It was all taken over by the Shire when CDP was scrapped. You know, our housing situation is worse than ever. And I sit on as a co-chair for Aboriginal Housing NT, and we talk about housing issues all the time and trying to get better housing conditions fixed for our people. And, you know, in reality, there is no such thing as an Aboriginal person living as a nuclear family. It will never happen. It's just like when the coronavirus kicked in, you wasn't going to separate us by isolating us, because that wasn't in our culture, because we're family orientated and we're people of gatherings. So we were actually safer at home with our families than being isolated, you know, because we don't know isolation unless we've gone to jail or we sit down in hospital for a long time. So education, you know, the statistics on education is right, because I work as a youth worker at night, and I know for a fact that a lot of our kids on the streets here in Alice Springs don't go to school, you know, and it's pretty sad that, you know, they can adopt another culture, but yet our youth aren't educated enough and to be caretakers and take over their grandfather and their grandmother's roles in their communities or out on country. And it's sad to say, you know, and Amelia had already said it, there are no programs or there's no support mechanisms in place for our elders and our leaders to start teaching our younger generation to become those elders and leaders in the future. So, you know, wherever I can, I stand up for what is needed, and our people actually need to be recognised, and our people need to be listened to. Because if no one, you know, if no one listens today, who's going to listen in the future? So it's the best thing to start teaching our kids, because, or our next generation, about what had happened in the past, because what's going to happen in the past is going to just keep continuing until somebody gets it right, and until we get the right people in Parliament. And people like our member from Nhulunbuy, he's doing the right thing, you know, and people are starting to talk, but we need to might have to start listening to our member from the top end. And, you know, you get people like Uncle Harry, who says, I've been there before, I've been fighting the fight for so long, generations after generation, and yet here I am still today, living in the same community where nothing's changed. And, you know, I've got to say, you know, out of Utopia, you still have people living in tin sheds and whatever materials that they can find. And I know that because I got family out that way as well. And when you look at, you know, okay, with the current situation with the coronavirus, it was really hard on food security for our mob in our community stores, because we already know with the intervention, the food prices went up. So people are still buying a lot less for a high price of food, you know. So the high cost of living out in remote communities has not helped our mob close the gap on health. You know, a lot of our mob are still suffering with diabetes, heart problem, kidney failure, you know, the lack of identity when it, you know, comes to being somebody who belongs on country. You know, we get so much racism in this town. You know, we're the biggest high populated police town in little known Australia, but, you know, in the territory. And, you know, we, after what happened last year with, you know, Kumanjayi Walker, it was really hard to try and have those conversations with the police, because it's going to take a long time for our mob to start trusting police again. You know, they came in with the army in 2007 and they came in, yeah, and yet they can't focus on trying to keep our kids at school. You know, so when it comes to a lot of issues that affect us, Black lives do matter, because we need a roof over our heads. We need to keep our kids out of jail. We need to keep our men and women safe from family and domestic violence. You know, we need to make sure there are proper food security for our people in remote communities, and we need to close the gap on our health and our life expectancy. And the government is not going to do that alone unless they start listening to us and working generally with us, you know. So, and I've had these decent conversations with Federal Minister Ken Wyatt. So, you know, I believe that he is a good understanding person, and, you know, got to take my hat off to him, because he's the first minister, Aboriginal person who's ever had this role, and we should be having these genuine conversations with him. And he needs to start listening, because in WA, they were having all of those community closures. And, you know, suicide is also affecting Aboriginal people in WA, you know, sacred site damages, all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I don't know what else to say.
Just maybe one thing just to get your final thoughts on there, Barb, is I'm interested, you worked on the Royal Commission that came out of the horrendous images from Dondale, and you work with the land councils, you've done the UN complaint, you're working in the housing, you know, you're doing everything. I was interested that one of the, you know, I was wondering how you, in all the things you do, where do you think we see the most change and can make the most difference? And I was particularly interested in your thoughts around how important representation in Parliament is.
Well, I ran as a candidate for the Greens Party, both in the federal election and territory election. But I guess it is because you know, I wouldn't be able to win a seat in Alice Springs given, you know, this element in this town. But yeah, I reckon the best thing you need is an Aboriginal person, especially for our bush seats, and that's most marginalised. You know, we've got but they're starting to shift the boundaries now, so there's less seats in Parliament. But you have to have the right people in there. You know, like which days? Claire Martin, Paul Henderson days. You know, we had a lot of Aboriginal MLAs in the past, but you know, I believe that they should have done a lot more to stand up for us against the federal John Howard era, and as well as Tony Abbott. But when you know, when he ran the country, but when we have our own people representing our own people in Parliament, because it's the legislators that's going to make a change. And if our legislators and our members of Parliament are going to make a difference to our people, you know, that's where it's got to be. And then you got those, you know, non-Aboriginal people that have been around Aboriginal people for a long time, or First Nations peoples that know the issues, you know, and they know what's needed. They're the ones that are also to be supported. So it's the people who's going to make a change are the legislators, and we need to get on those legislators' ears.
And Barb, did you want to add anything?
I think the best thing that we can probably do as a nation is share our stories and have these real discussions with people, and, you know, stop listening to people who's misleading the country. Because at the end of the day, we are Aboriginal people, First Nations people that was affected by a very racist policy that only affected Aboriginal people living on homelands, communities, and town camps throughout the Northern Territory. And we are still affected by this policy, no matter it falls under, you know, there was a 5-year caretaker mode for the emergency response, but we live it under, we're still living under it through Stronger Futures. And tell everybody, you know, I would, and I've been on income management, even though I work and I'm a deputy chair for a big statutory organisation, I'm still on income management because I still have to do my obligations. And my compassion is where it lies, you know, for our rights to be reconciled with. And we will never have that recognition, not yet. And Amelia is right to say we have to wait. You know, it might be a long time waiting, but we're going to get there someday. But at the end of the day, you know, if we don't keep the fire burning and keep the fight going, you know, who's going to be there to stand up for my grandchildren or my great-grandchildren? Are my great-grandchildren going to be in the same predicament as we are today? So I'd prefer to, you know, tell 10 friends, make sure you have that open discussion. And, you know, because we live it and we tell it how it is. Because that policy has not, you know, just only affected us as Aboriginal people, but it affected our work colleagues, our very close friends, you know, who are non-Aboriginal. People might have gained a profit out of the intervention, but at the end of the day, we all suffered. And people don't care about the emotional stress that we have to live under day to day, day in, day out, you know, every night, and then watch our kids suffer more because of the systemic racism that we have in this country. So if you don't want to be treated, you know, people need to be educated on how it is in the territory, because not only in the territory, but, you know, whatever's happening here, it's going to start that ripple effect elsewhere. You know, suicide is right across the country. You know, youth imprisonment is right across the country. You know, the income management here and the basic card in the territory, but look how much money is going to be spent on, you know, the cashless debit card. It's costing the government $8,000 for me, you know, to stay on income management, to have my Centrelink or welfare payments income managed. It might get me by and I still work, you know, I contribute to the society. We all do. We contribute to the society. We contribute to the economics of this country. This country wouldn't be where it is today without the, you know, back of the hands of the Aboriginal person, men and women in this country, you know. So whether if it be racist or not, but you guys need to, you know, non-Aboriginal people need to have these real conversations about our livelihoods in this country.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Thank you, Barb. And it's a good reminder too of the responsibility that non-Indigenous people have to support these changes.